Well, most of us think of cults as remote, maybe people in the woods wearing robes or having wild ceremonies on distant compounds, but Cargill's work suggests the reality is, sometimes, way more ordinary, operating right next door, especially in immigrant-heavy neighbourhoods, with tactics hidden in plain sight. This is a wake-up call that big social dangers don't always look like what we see on TV. Angela Cargill's research zooms in on a network called Back to the Cross, operating in the US from the early 90s all the way into the late 2000s across states like Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, and Arizona. The core leader, a Peruvian national, targeted undocumented Mexican immigrants, recruiting them, their immigration status, and keeping everything looking kind of normal in quiet residential neighborhoods. Let's dig into the key methods and findings. This is what the paper really lives and breathes for. How did the group keep people under its control? Cargill applies a framework you may have heard of: BITE model: behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. So first, behavior control. Members lived packed into houses, sometimes, get this, 8 people to a room. Yikes. Their work, daily routines, finances, and even marriages tightly managed by this leadership. Imagine giving up all your autonomy just to survive and keep your head down. Next up, information control. Kids disappeared from school registrations, outside books, media were banned, and any ties to the outside world, photos, family connections, even birthdays, were systematically destroyed. That's wild to think about, right? It's like erasing A's entire pre-cult identity, which, according to Carg, left survivors with serious challenges rebuilding a sense of self later on thought and emotional control. There were forced confessions in group meetings, public humiliations, and using religion to make obedience non-negotiable. Urship positioned themselves as speaking directly for God, so to speak. Members who left became, in the group's words, ill worshippers, which, honestly, sounds so dramatic, but for people inside, was absolutely terrifying. But the most unique and maybe shocking layer, this was all built on exploiting undocumented status. The leader and his associates actively smuggled people across the border, charged harbouring fees, and then kept them economically captive. If you're undocumented, going to the police, or even just leaving, isn't simple. The fear of ICE raids or being detained was weaponized to keep everyone in line. The idea that these controls weren't just psychological or religious, but legal and social. Wow, it's a messy web. So what does this mean for listeners like you? Well, Argyll's findings show that exploitation can actually thrive under the cover of normalcy when vulnerable people feel trapped and invisible. The paper argues that survivors often face something called institutional betrayal trauma, when the systems meant to protect children, immigrants, or abuse victims end up failing, or even, at times, protecting abusers through bureaucratic gaps. This leads to a weird sense of delayed realization. Survivors might not even recognize what happened to was abuse until years later. And one little side tangent, bear with me, reading about this network's use of aliases, ducking between different group names, all these moving shells, I started thinking about email spam. You know, when you get 8 messages from the same person, but every single one has a different address. Isn't it odd how bad actors in totally different worlds use similar hiding tricks? Anyway, back the main point, Angela Cargill's work suggests a few big implications. For clinicians, there's a need to treat not just trauma, but the specific identity loss and delayed reporting these survivors experience. For law enforcement, they may need way more cross-agency communication. For regular neighbours, well, maybe a little more skepticism of normal-looking organisations that exert really strong control over people's lives. Look, just my friendly reminder, I'm here to share the research, not endorse it. Angela Cargill is offering one well-developed perspective, and academic work like this is about sparking thought and debate, not absolute answers. So, if you walk away from this episode thinking about how group dynamics, immigration status, and even neighbourhood anonymity can interact in new ways, you're engaging exactly as academia hopes you will. What does safety mean when the danger is hidden right in front of us? How do we support people whose history was erased? There aren't easy answers, but understanding the patterns is a powerful first step. Thanks so much for in depth with academia. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and don't be afraid to think deeper about the world you live in. See you next time.